Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tonellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I have made it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. Listeners, Jo Skinner is a Brisbane-based author of 2 novels, a practising GP, as well as a long-distance runner. Now, I connected with Jo online a couple of years ago and have watched on with delight as she achieved her publication dream last year with the release of her debut novel, The Truth About My Daughter, and again this year with her new novel, out officially today, the 14th of April, A World of Silence. Published by Hawkeye Publishing, A World of Silence is one of those books you want to press into the hands of every woman you know. A commentary on modern society and the kind of life many women lead, it explores the consequences of speaking up in the face of unspeakable truths and in turn the consequences of staying silent. A book I had the very great honour of reading ahead of publication and for which I could only offer the highest praise. A remarkable read from a rising talent in Australian contemporary women's fiction, and I'm delighted to say that Jo is here with me to chat about her novel on the podcast today. Welcome, Jo.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a bit of a dream to come onto your podcast. Tick something off my bucket list today. Day of publication is it's just like magic. So thank you, Claudine, very much for having me.
Oh, such a pleasure, Jo. And I want to say formally, congratulations on your newest novel.
Thank you very much.
How are you feeling about it?
It really is. It's like a much longer labour. It's been a long time in the making. Today I did a little Instagram post and I said, my truth about my daughter's got a younger sister.
Now, I was thinking earlier when I was preparing for this interview how lucky I am to connect with so many talented authors, people like you, who I couldn't honestly say, I mean, I don't know if I would ever have met you had it not been for this podcast. And I mean, I'd like to think that we might have crossed paths in person one day, but you live in Brisbane and I'm here in Sydney. So I guess for me, it's like, it feels like a testament to the power of connection and the tight-knit nature of the writing community here in Australia. Does it feel like that for you?
For me, since starting writing, and particularly through Instagram, there was so much negative stuff about social media, but I've met so many lovely people. I really only follow writers and runners. And then meeting you in person at the Northern Beaches Writer Special, that was magic. And I think your daughter was just in the middle of year 12 and my son was at the same time. So I felt we really connected on that, knowing what it's like having a kid in year 12. So yeah, it's really special, isn't it? And people who write and read have a special connection because you've always got something to talk about. We're people of words, aren't we?
I couldn't agree with you more. And to my delight, you've been a fan of the podcast for a little while now and have truly been so supportive and spreading the word through your regular newsletters. So I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to return the favour today.
It's been a pleasure. There's nothing like listening to a podcast and going out and getting the book and then maybe meeting the author and getting them to sign it. You feel much more connected with the book once you've listened to a podcast. And because they're all Australian authors, yours is particularly special, I think.
Jo, many people listening in today will be interested to understand more about your journey to publication because not only are you a novelist, but you've written numerous short stories as well as non-fiction in the form of articles that have appeared in women's magazines and medical journals. You're a practising GP, you're a wife, you're a mother and a long-distance runner. And when I talk to such amazingly accomplished people like you, I feel a little bit exhausted in the nicest of possible ways. But I wanted to ask you, Jo, how do you fit it all in?
I didn't start writing till 2018. I did a course with the Writers' Centre in Sydney, an online course with them. And it's something I'd wanted to do for a long time. I just kept thinking, I'm just too busy. And I know just before we started this podcast, we were talking about the importance of creativity. And I think I decided I was very particular about all sorts of things before I started. And now I just really focus on the things I love. So I do love the running and I love the writing. And if I've got something I've got to write, that just takes priority. I don't worry about the basket of washing downstairs and my tax return. And I'll buy little falafels and pocket breads and we'll have that with some salad for dinner. So I have let go a lot of the stuff that we do that doesn't really bring me much joy or pleasure. So, and I don't think the family are missing out or unhappy or things. So the place is probably a bit more disorganized. Our meals are a lot simpler and my kids are old enough now they can help cook and things. So it is harder when they're really little, but I do prioritize. So when I do a bit of a rough timetable for the week, I prioritize the things I really love, and that is the writing, the running and a bit of keeping up to date with work and things. And I always put in some time off. So I try to do that every week. Yeah. So there's no magic. It really is just focusing on the important things, not sweating the small stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you talked a little bit about, prioritizing the important things and not sweating the small stuff. So, what does your writing practice look like? Do you write every day, or do you schedule those specific times to write? How does it all work for you?
So I write most days. So I write a combination of non-fiction. So I'll often have a couple of deadlines for, like I write for Mind Food, for example. So this morning before I spoke to you, I had to do a final check of a piece on endometriosis that I'd written. And that doesn't take me very long. So I'm doing that at work every day. So I just double check a few facts and things, stats and things for the number of women, that sort of thing. So that thing I can do pretty quickly. There's a few mornings a week where I get up really early and I write. So I either run or write early in the morning. And then I don't work full time. So and the days when I'm off, I come home and I just close the door and I schedule. I tend to do my fictional writing then. And I try most weekends to burrow away at least 2 or 3 hours, both days or on one. Like this last weekend, I couldn't because I had a few other things on, like someone else's book launch and things. But I'm pretty disciplined with it. So I think those mornings I get up, whether I'm tired, whether I've been up late, sometimes been with my writing group, maybe had an extra glass of wine. But I still, and it's amazing, once you actually sit at the computer. I just read a book, I think it was Elizabeth George, she calls it bum glue. And I think once you're sitting there and you start, it's actually not as hard as, and because I enjoy doing it too. It's sort of like my sneaky time for myself. And I think I started late too. And I think when you start later in life, if I'd probably been in my 20s, it becomes more precious. You realize how fast time goes and how little time you've got. So you just want to use it all really well, doing the things you like. So yeah, I do schedule it. But if I get a little slot in my day, I'll often do a bit of writing then as well. So I can fit things into little gaps. So let's take my computer with me or a book and I either read or I write whenever I can. Yeah.
Love that. I was interested to find out, and we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but I was interested to find out that A World of Silence was written before The Truth About My Daughter, but it was the second to be published by Hawkeye. So I wondered, Jo, if you could explain to us how that came about. Why was it that your second book was actually published first?
So I finished the first draft of this book 2 weeks before Hannah Clark and her 3 children were murdered. And that was I know it was a huge international thing. In Brisbane, there was a pall over the city for a long time. It was just such a horrific thing. And because I do deal with themes of coercive control, I felt I actually put it aside for quite a period of time after that. And I did get quite negative feedback from an editor at the time. Not negative, they just felt that maybe the themes in the book were a little bit, were a bit extreme, I guess. So I did put it aside and it's gone through multiple edits. But then I wrote The Truth About My Daughter, and I submitted that to the Hawkeye. They have an annual competition, which is open now if anybody wants to enter. And it's quite good because there's a number of writing competitions earlier in the year, and some of them give you feedback. And then using that feedback, you can submit to Hawkeye, which is not till December. And I placed second in that competition. So I was offered a contract for The Truth About My Daughter and then asked whether they had any other books. And then I pulled this one out again and edited it quite extensively and got a bit of help with that. By then, I think I'd matured and I had gone through the process with a book. So I think it's become a much better book as a result of waiting. Yeah, so that's how it happened. Really just winning the comp. And then this one longlisted actually as well. So as a result of having one book published, they then offered me a contract for this one.
There was less than 6 months between the release of books 1 and 2, and that's quite unusual in the publishing industry, well, certainly here in Australia. Was that planned?
I don't recommend it. I'm actually exhausted at the moment. I think you just don't want to say no. You get offered a contract, but I think it was in my head. I thought I hadn't done enough with The Truth About My Daughter, and I really enjoyed that book, my first baby, really. So I feel it's like when you have your kids too close together, the first one misses out a bit. But look, it's all exciting and lovely. So it was not planned by me. It certainly wasn't planned that way, but then it was very exciting to get a second contract. So I think I'm going to have a bigger gap now. I've got a couple of others that are written, but they need editing and things. I do need a gap before I do more work on those. Yes.
Jo, as I mentioned, I was delighted to have the opportunity to read A World of Silence a while ago now. I can't remember. It was I think it was before Christmas that I read it. And I was immediately engrossed by this very modern story in many ways. And normally I ask people to tell me about their inspiration, but I might do things a little bit differently and ask
Yes.
you to tell me about the story first, and then we'll go into your inspiration.
So it's really, I think at its heart, it's a book about female friendship. So there's a group of 3 women. They were friends at university, and 2 of them sort of keep in touch. Tori and Kate. I went to uni together. Kate is now a psychologist, and she's sort of juggling work. She has a husband who's a musician and doesn't really make much money because I think he doesn't help terribly much at home. Not necessarily a bad man, but not a very helpful man. Probably a very common scenario. Tori is a single mum and she's raising her son on her own, and she's fulfilled her dream to have a secondhand vintage store with where she restores furniture. And her great love is getting old clothes and making them beautiful again. So she's got that. It's called the treasure chest, and she's absolutely determined that her son will never meet his father. Then another uni friend by the name of Shelley lands in town, and she's now become very well known. She's married to a high-profile footballer. The wedding was featured in the Woman's Weekly, and her husband, Daryl, was Kate's first love. So when Daryl arrives, that really stirs things up, and it just brings up things from the past and a lot of truths and things that they've kept hidden and secrets that they haven't really talked about or addressed just come to the surface. And really the book as it evolves is about how they deal with those secrets.
As you say, at its heart, it's a story about female friendship. But you mentioned Hannah Clark and her 3 children a little bit earlier. And I don't think there would be many people who don't remember Hannah and what happened to them. It was a line in the sand in many ways for Australian society, but it hasn't actually spelt the end of, this kind of like behaviour that Hannah fell victim to. So with that in mind, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your inspiration for writing A World of Silence.
Well, I guess as a GP, I have over the years had a number of experiences where I've had to deal voluntarily. I know there's people who work just in the arena of domestic violence, but I'm sort of often there as a result of my work. So I still remember when I was an intern, I did my internship in Burnie in Tasmania because I wanted to do it in a small rural hospital. And I don't think I had any idea what I was in for. But I still remember one of the first rotations I had was the emergency department. So I don't think they do that now. But as an intern, you're on by yourself with a very senior nurse who I'm still good friends with. And you have to deal with anything that came in. And you know nothing when you're an intern. I don't want to scare people going to a hospital. But as an intern, you really are finding your feet and you've got lots of head knowledge, but you haven't got a lot of experience. I'm so grateful for this lovely nurse who looked after me so well. And I actually also insisted on doing an anaesthetic list because I wanted to be confident I could intubate a person if they came in. But I remember I was there one night. You had 10 nights on, 2 days off, and then 10 days on and 2 days off. So it was quite a rigorous 12-hour shift. And I was there, I think it was about midnight, 2 in the morning, and this young woman, 16-year-old woman, comes in with her boyfriend, and they'd driven from one of the other very small Tasmanian towns with abdominal pain, and she said she had appendicitis. So I'm sort of thinking, I thought, this woman's pregnant. Oh my God, she's got appendicitis as well. So I had to, you really think twice about calling the obstetrician because they are the only person there. And at 2 in the morning, it really has to be a good reason. Something felt off about the whole thing. And she turned out that she was sexually active with her boyfriend, but they always used condoms, and the father of this child was her father. So that was my first real contact with abuse of a woman. And she was sent, it was all hush-hush, and she was sent over for a late termination at a time when that was really not very commonly done, to Melbourne. And to my shame, I never really followed her up. And when you work in emergency, you see people once and you don't follow them up. And I really feel now, I wish I'd followed her up. It must have been extraordinarily traumatic, having this late termination with a child, your father's child. It was just terrible. And since then, I've had so many experiences of women who are either in abusive relationships, either through an intimate partner or through a relative. I had an 80-year woman once who I've known for years. I check her blood pressure she's in renal failure now, so her blood pressure is quite difficult to manage. So she comes in very regularly, and just not so long ago, she came in, I'm doing a blood pressure, writing out a script, and she tells me that years ago when she was a young woman, she'd been sexually assaulted and she'd never told anybody. She has 4 daughters, never told them, never told her husband. And we sort of talked about that a little bit. I sort of spoke very gently around it. It was obviously a very difficult thing for her. And she went to see Grace Tame, who spoke at the Brisbane Writers' Festival, and came back, and I asked her how it was, and she said, I feel so much better because I know that I'm not on my own. So there's so many women elderly women and women of every age carrying this sort of shame about incidences where they've either been abused or where they've been, you know, either physically or sexually abused. And I think there's a very large number of women who are in relationships where they just don't own themselves. You know, they mightn't even be hit, or they mightn't be sexually assaulted, but they don't have control of their finances. There's this sort of there's little ways that they are eroded and their self-confidence goes. And the more that goes, the less inclined they are to tell anybody. And it's so hard to pinpoint. So people, you don't even know what to tell people, you know, that he watches me, or I can't go out with my friends, or because it's a subtle, gradual thing. And we know now that 1 in 4 women in a relationship where that sort of thing happens. So I think I've accumulated over the years this portfolio of women, and I know I'm only seeing the tip of the iceberg. And I think I wanted to give these people a voice, for people to say it's actually okay to talk about it. And just since the book, like before today's the release day, so we've had quite a few beta readers and things. And I had one of my closest friends I've known since I was at preschool, and we're still in contact, read the book and then contacted me and said, my daughter was strangled and she was lucky to survive. And we felt really lucky because he got 9 months for nearly strangling somebody. You know, you feel lucky. Another Sydney author saying, oh, she was actually her first relationship. He was really awful to her. And she sort of spoke about some of the things he did and said. So it's really common. And it's our friends and our sisters and our neighbour and the person we work with and a person we've known for, 40 years, 50 years. So I think it came together slowly. As women, we do need to stand up together. And I think we need to educate our men from when they're little, our boys. I don't think it's all up to us. I think we need to address this issue of toxic masculinity, where a boy at school can get away with, showing dick pics or showing without consent photographs of his girlfriend, or making sexist or misogynistic remarks. And he needs to be one. The other boys, because there are nice men around. I mean, I've married to a lovely man. I'm sure you are too. We have lots of nice men around, and we need those men to turn around and actually say, that's just not on, mate, and then to exclude him, not invite him next time. And if he's not given oxygen and he's not looked up to and things, I think that nip it in the bud. I don't know how we do that at home, at schools, in our churches, in our, community organisations. So I feel in this book, I just wanted to raise it so that just raise the discussion a bit more, so that we re-educate our boys from when they're little, and also encourage women to support each other and ask difficult questions. It's a very long answer. I'm sorry about that.
Not at all. It's a perfect answer. It's stuff we all need to hear, Jo. Obviously, this is an issue that concerns us as women and as a society. And I mean, what kind of future is there for our daughters and granddaughters if this behaviour isn't addressed in the most comprehensive way? But I kind of want to delve a little bit deeper in that. I want to ask you, is this an issue that can be addressed if women aren't willing to speak up? Because we know that, like one of the characters in your book, the problem is deeper and far more reaching than our official statistics show. And you've said, you're probably just hearing the tip of the iceberg. We have, 3 very different women in this novel, all who have kind of experienced this behavior in different ways. Yeah, I kind of just want to ask you, like, what do we do when women won't come forward? What do you do as a doctor when you suspect or you think something like this might be going on, but the woman concerned isn't willing to say anything?
I mean, I'm slowly getting better at it. I think a lot of it is about reading between the lines. So I'll give you an example. That good friend of mine whose daughter was strangled, that daughter, I actually know that daughter. She's a very flamboyant and big hair, makeup. She's quite a goer. And she rang up one Mother's Day and said, oh, Mum, I've decided I'm not going to come to Mother's Day. And the mum turned to her husband and said, that's just not right, because she's a girl. She always organises the Mother's Day events, and she's right in there. She's a very social person. There's something wrong. So I'm going to say that could be, she could have been sick, could have been anything, but she just had that sense that there was something not right. And that's how she went around, and then she burst into tears and told them what was, what had been happening. So I think often with our friends, we're told with mental health issues to actually ask people, are you okay? Not to leave it there, then if behaviour changes, or somebody who's been a very outgoing, person suddenly becomes something changes or doesn't go out with her friends anymore, or doesn't seem to have money to do things, or changes the way she dresses. It can be all sorts of really subtle things. And I think we just have to be very attuned to the people that we know and not to be frightened to say, oh, that's none of my business, I'm not going to get in there. So I'm slowly becoming better at asking patients difficult questions. And it's quite difficult because we get very short time with people. So I've learned to become quite good at just asking a question that'll just take the lid off the, that little scab, let it bleed a little bit. And I think if people are given permission to talk and they know it's safe to talk, they're more likely to say, well, if you even say, if you yourself have had an experience, oh gosh, I was with this terrible person, this happened to me and I left. And I think giving people permission to make it safe for them to talk, to know that you're not going to tell other people if they're not happy for you to do that, asking for permission and just saying, well, things don't seem right, you're just not yourself. Why don't we go out and have a coffee? I do think just normalising, telling people, like, we talk about everything. I mean, women, we talk about everything when we go out. But there's just this little area where we feel such shame. I don't know why we made to feel such shame about it. I think it's just living in still a very patriarchal society. And I think seeing men in very senior roles who wear actual sexual assault, and we know footballers, movie stars, they're often, there's a big rah-rah in the media, and then it all just dies down again. So I think we need to hold men to account, and that needs to be seen to be happening. Actually, I had an experience, Claudine. It was quite, I feel still quite distressed about it. It was when the Brittany Higgins thing was at its height. And I was working a Saturday morning and I had this young girl, I think she was 16, come in, and she'd been to a music event, and she, of course, can't buy alcohol because she's underage. And she really went for the music, and this older man bought her alcohol and was really nice to her, and then pretty much forced himself onto her sexually. And she just froze and didn't know what to do. So there was no protection used, and she came in, she wouldn't look at me. She was just looking at the ground, and I was, you have to reassure her it was not her fault. By him buying alcohol, that was not consent, So I did all I used to do the forensic examinations for women who've been sexually assaulted in a regional town. So I went through that whole process, and I said to her, I'm going to document everything that happened here in your files, that if you decide you want to take it further, you want to press charges, I'm happy to do a report, and these things will be kept for 10 years, all of these swabs and things we've done. And she said, oh, I don't want to become another Brittany. That was her response. And I think that just tells us everything we need to know. Do you want to be the woman that's in a public arena, probably with a lot of men, being grilled about your sex life and how much alcohol you drink or drank that time, what you were wearing? You don't want to expose yourself to that sort of public humiliation. So we might need to change those things as well. So it's very layered. I think just recognising the little subtle things in our friends, not being frightened to ask how people are, not just asking once. If they're still not okay next week, say, look, I'm really worried about you. Why don't we go out and have a coffee or go and see a film or something? And just being available, saying, you can always call me for anything. You don't have to specify what it is. I think we need to feel safe with each other and with our secrets. We need to be able to talk to our friends and our family and the people we're close to, maybe a work colleague. It doesn't matter who it is. And I think sometimes we don't do that. Women aren't always very nice to each other.
That's very true. Now, I did mention we have three very different women in this novel. We've got Kate, Tori, and Shelley, whom you introduced us to a little bit earlier. Kate, as you said, is a busy mum who has an intense job as a psychologist, and she's the main income earner in her family. And her husband plays in a band and ends up being a wedding entertainer, which kind of takes him away from his family at a time when their marriage is probably not the most stable. And it's in this state that she becomes quite nostalgic about her relationship with Daryl, her first serious boyfriend, and someone she thought she was going to marry. And it kind of makes her vulnerable to him in many ways, doesn't it?
Yes, very much. And I think he's got he ticks all those boxes. He's handsome. And I deliberately didn't pick an existing football team, but he's part of a football team that was doing very well. He's got a lot of money and he's well known. He's a bit of a catch, really. And I think we do often give these people more oxygen than we should. And some of them deserve it. Many of them don't.
I always say about high profile sports people, they're not brain surgeons. They're not out there saving people's lives. Why do we revere them so much?
I think sports, and in Australia particularly, probably in America as well, but we do love our sports people. And I think it's much easier to win an election when you fund a new sporting arena than it is to win an election if you build a new art centre or a writer centre. I don't think that gets nearly as much clicks and nearly as many votes. So I think it does say something about her. We do admire, and I think sport's a great thing. It gives a lot of people a lot of opportunity. I'm not against sport at all, but I don't think it's very balanced. I think we probably give sport far more oxygen than we do other things.
So well said. Yeah. So then we have Tori. And as you say, Tori is also a busy mum to Leo, and she's fiercely protective of her son, but she's still in many ways suffering from a trauma in her past, which kind of seeps into the present. She never really told anyone what happened to her. And this kind of enabled a toxic and criminal cycle of behavior to continue.
Yes. I think Tori's very proud, and I think she really represents a lot of women. We just want her, there's that sense of wanting to forget the past and move on. Like if you've had a terrible childhood or things, there are some people who will really, but many people just feel like my 80-year-old woman, 80. So she's had 4 kids and something happened to her when she was a very young woman, and she's carried that for, 60, 70 years. And I think there's a sense of, what will people think of me if they know this about me, that this has happened to me, I allowed this to happen. And often we feel, in some sense, I think we're so conditioned, we think, is there something, that's the way like this young woman who didn't want to become a Brittany. Should I have taken those drinks? Is it my fault? Is it what I was wearing? Is it what I said? Is it what I did? So we sort of almost feel we have to appease these men who behave poorly. They're still, and we see that in relationships that are quite good relationships, that she's sort of around there making sure that everything, the peacekeeper, the mum who makes sure everything's okay. We don't want to upset dad, he's had a big day at work. We've often had a big day too. And we tend not to have someone stepping around us, making sure everything's okay. And, oh my goodness, there's no milk. Why is it my responsibility whether there's milk or Weet Bix or, whereas we tend to carry that responsibility. And I think we also carry the shame. And it should be the person who did those things to us that carries the shame, but it isn't. The person who's hanging their head is the person who's the victim, and the perpetrator gets off scot-free. I think Tori is a really good example of that. She's a proud, she's self-made, and she's created this wonderful store, the Treasure Chest, and she loves making other people happy by finding their little something that, makes them feel good about themselves. And I think she feels that would be compromised if she let on what her background was, what had happened to her in the past.
Then we have Shelley. She's a very complex character. She was Kate's best friend, and then she went on to marry Kate's first love, Daryl. It becomes clear, despite the fame and the lavish lifestyle that Shelley and Daryl lead because of Daryl's sporting notoriety, that Shelley's life is far from the perfect one painted by the media. And to drill down into Shelley's character for a moment, she tells Kate that Daryl has never hurt her, but he has an explosive temper, and he watches everything she does. He watches how she spends her money, and he knows where she is at all times, or tries to. She won't leave him, and she won't speak out against her husband, nor will she get counselling. And I kind of want to talk about this fear of speaking out, which keeps women prisoner in many ways. It's the fear of losing their children. It's the fear of losing financial stability, their friends, and the fear that no one will believe them. It's, as you say, the fear that people will judge them. And I know it's not easy for women to speak up. So what's the answer here?
Look, there's no simple answers, unfortunately. I mean, I think I wrote a piece for Mindfood a few years ago, and there's one woman, she didn't inspire Shelley, but I think Shelley's a composite of a lot of people that I've seen. But she was in a relationship with a fellow who was very affluent. He owned several businesses in New Zealand and Australia. And he was quite handsome and charming. I think I met him once, and he's certainly a fellow you could imagine, oh yeah, if he'd asked you out, you probably would have said yes, because he, said all the right things, did all the right things. It was horrific. She had such a, so 4 daughters. It took her years to leave. They were all going to very expensive private schools. And she was, I think she had a job part-time as an admin officer somewhere. So her income could definitely not have covered the lifestyle. I mean, they had this gorgeous house, and it had all the bells and whistles. Their swimming pool, and she had lovely clothes, and she was somebody who really liked that sort of lifestyle. But her life was absolutely miserable. And her family, when she spoke to a member of her family, they said, oh, you have no idea how lucky you are. It's nobody's perfect. You really should suck that up. It was a sort of sense of, you've got all these good things, you should weigh those good things against the bad things. Some of the sexual things he did to her, I mean, I certainly can't repeat the other thing. They were just horrific. He expected sex sometimes multiple times a day and to do things that she felt really uncomfortable doing that hurt her. And what's interesting is that those girls, 2 of those girls are now long-term counselors. They've never been able to form intimate relationships. So she did leave him. But the problem was when she left him, that's when women are at greatest risk. So if you've got a pet, for example, women don't leave if there's a pet because that pet will be harmed in some way. Often they threaten the pet. They'll threaten other members of their family, like, for example, their parents who might be elderly and things somewhere. This fellow went back to New Zealand to his family, who thought she was terrible, fancy leaving. Look at this fantastic bloke and you've left him. Her family actually said, we can't believe that you've left him. And she's now living in a very ordinary place somewhere. Her kids are all grown up. This was a few years ago. He ended up in hospital. He had a suicide attempt, which was, I don't know, the cry for help and things, and sent photographs to his children saying, this is what your mother did to me. So this is why people, it goes on. It's not like when you leave that it's all over and you've, oh, finally we've left. There's all these other consequences. So that women with pets, we need to consider that the RSPCA will, in Queensland, I don't necessarily in every state, will take them for 28 days and look after them. 28 days is not very long to set yourself up and get another house. You're often financially very compromised because often these women don't have their own bank accounts. At the surgery, I've had a couple of women where I say you can use the surgery to make phone calls and that sort of thing, and sometimes they do. But another woman, she's got a couple of kids with disabilities, and she eventually left, and it just goes on and on. He doesn't pay for anything. He's set his tax up so it looks like he hasn't got very high income. He has a very senior role and deals with sort of family law and things. So he was just terrible too. And it's actually when he hurt one of the children that she left, not when he was hurting her. So yeah, it's very complicated. It's never, leaving isn't always the answer because often things escalate when people leave. And I think we all need to be aware of that and provide safe spaces. And we need more housing for women that's affordable would be another thing. Very topical with an election coming up, I know, but so it is really difficult. It's a complex web of things. And I do think feeling supported, if you had a family that said, look, we'll do anything, we'll help you financially, we'll provide a safe place for you to live, we'll, look after the kids for you. That's the sort of thing that I think is a practical help. Like that is really good. But it'd be great if we had more, if that was funded. And I have to say, every 9 days a woman is murdered by their intimate partner. Imagine if every 9 days there was a terrorist event and a person was murdered. I think there'd be no stop, all stops out, wouldn't there? There'd be legislation would be changed. There'd be nothing else on the news. There'd be, we'd run roughshod over certain laws to enable us to, do something about it. But this just goes on, goes on, goes on. And we don't really do anything. We say it's terrible and we look at the news and say, oh, that's awful, somebody else said something else has happened. And then it all just goes back to how it was. And I think that's, legislation is great, but I think we need more fundamental change, in the way things are set up and the way we're organised as a society and our values and how we raise our boys and what we consider acceptable. Not so long ago, it was shameful to be in a same-sex relationship. The majority of Australians actually voted to say that, and no one blinks an eyelid now. There's probably a few people in the extreme fundamental end of things, but generally people are completely accepting of that. So I think attitudes can change, and I think they can change in a relatively short period of time if we make a concerted effort as a society to do that. And if there's vision from the top, which I think is lacking at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So well said, Jo. You have boys, I have boys, and I completely am in agreement with the need to educate our boys from a young age about misogynistic behaviour and about attitudes to women. I know that I've had some very frank and open discussions with my own boys about things that we see in the media and our responses to it. But in the same way, do we need to talk about educating women about things like financial independence, recognising red flag behaviour like excessive controlling behaviour or love bombing or being socially isolated? That's not to say that I would never in a million years want to say that we blame women for being victims of this behaviour. But do we need to do more in terms of educating women to recognise the signs and making contingency plans? There's a lot of women that you speak to, probably a lot of women that I speak to also, Jo, who've never had their own bank account, who don't know what their financial circumstances look like because they leave that all to their husband. It's a very common scenario. A lot of women are at home looking after their families or only working part-time, so limited amount of income. The husband takes care of everything else, or the partner, or, whoever that may be. So is that another area that we need to pay attention to?
Oh, Claudine, I think you've tapped on something really important there. One of the things which I actually do say, particularly to younger women, is it's so important to have a piece of paper that says IMA. So go to university or go to TAFE, and so you can say I'm a hairdresser, I'm a nurse, I'm a teacher, and keep your toe in, even if you have a bit of a gap, when you have children and things. It's so important to keep, because that financial independence is so fundamental, and having a bank account. I think they're two things that I've said to my girls years ago when they were, still at school, saying the most important thing is that you need to know if something happens to your husband, I don't know if he dies or he leaves you or I think, or any relationship, you need to know that you could actually look after yourself. You need to know that you have the financial means, you can get back into the workforce pretty quickly, or that you can look after yourself. So I think that financial thing is really important, and that will be an area we could target, like at schools and things, teaching women to be like fiercely independent and in a good relationship, still to have your own account and to be able to do simple things like pay bills and those things. It's very common in the older age group that, that he dies and they have no idea at all. And there are some relationships this is why the coercive control thing is so complicated, where there'll be a couple and he's an accountant and she, they've got a good relationship. There's nothing thinking he just does the money because he's good at it and she isn't. But I think in that circumstances, it's still good. Like, I'll be honest, I was one of those women, I had no interest in money. I hated doing my tax return, is still one of my most hated things. I'm doing my best every 3 months. I still hate doing it, but I've had to force myself to do it. And I did start that later in life. So when I first married my husband, I used to get paid by personal check in a surgery in Canberra, and I used to put them in. So I paid all my bills and things. I'd just take a random check out and cash it and then pay so I was terrible with money. So I was never owed people money or anything. But I remember when he said, oh, you just can't do this. Maybe I should really manage the money. And I actually did let him do that for a few years. And it became important, I think, to me and to him too, that I actually knew what happened. So if something happened to him, that I could access all the accounts and do those things. So I did change that, but that's actually not an uncommon scenario. So I think you've really hit something important there, that I think something we need to teach our women from a young age is, even if you're not working all the time, if you choose to take time out and you have a partner, it's really important you still feel that you could get back into the workforce pretty easily, and that you can earn enough to keep your head above water and to be able to look after your children. So I think that's really important, yeah. And always to have an account in your name, or one that you can access all the time. Bit of a red flag when you can't do that anymore.
I think that's one of the biggest things I've tried to impart to my own daughter, was that, if you want to get married and have a family, that's fantastic and that's a wonderful thing to be able to do. But you need to have something that you can fall back on, a qualification, something that you can do that will earn you money. And always have your own bank account.
Totally. And it's good to have something. I think we're in a society where if you don't have any skills, if you leave school and you're becoming more and more unemployable now, you do need, and it doesn't, it can be a trade, it can be a thing, but I think having a piece of paper where you can actually show it to someone, so, that they've seen that you've been through some sort of a course, and done something, I think that's really helpful. I don't think you can just rely on stacking shelves at Woolies and Coles, and their working conditions are quite poor and the pay is really poor. You can't survive in today's society on that income. So I think just having something that's a great job when you're at uni and you're trying to earn trying to save up for a car and things, but it's not such a good job if you're a woman in her 40s with 3 children and trying to leave an abusive relationship.
I was looking at your website, Jo, and I was awestruck to learn that you have completed some 60 marathons in your lifetime. Now, that by anyone's standards is unbelievable. So you're not just a woman who happens to go for a long run when the fancy takes her. You're someone who dedicates time regularly to being fit enough to undertake these events. And I want to say something clever, like marathon running is a bit like novel writing or any writing. In fact, it takes constant dedication to your craft and practice, entering marathons to test your limits and endurance, much like the way you seem to have put your writing work out there for competitions and the like. Am I drawing too long a bow there?
No, it's very similar. So I call my newsletter Running Writing. to keep fit, I say to people, if you can run 3 to 5 kilometres, 3 to 5 times a week, so a really big week where you're feeling fantastic and no one's sick and your kids are getting off to school fine and work's not too stressful, you might get 5 runs in of 5 kilometres. On a slow week where there's a bit of thing, you might just get three, but to have that as your bottom bar. But there's something about distance running. You have this, first of all, you get about 4 hours to yourself, depending how long it takes you to do a marathon, which is really like, it's a gift really. And you get a lot of time to think. So for me, I often use that time to plot and plan, and I often think out through articles. If I'm in a difficult bit in the novel, I'm wondering, how am I ever going to resolve that? How's that going to end? It's amazing how going on a run just loosens all that up, loosens up that part of the brain. I think people who meditate get that as well, and I'm sure it happens for people who go bushwalking or do something else. But in a marathon, it really starts at about 30 kilometres. You get to 30 kilometres, you feel, and then you just, that last 12 kilometres is always really hard. You think, why am I doing this? I'm never doing another one. But it's like the middle of a book, isn't it? You get that, you've got a great beginning and you've got an idea for the end, and then you've got this long wading through treacle bit in the middle where you try to get squeeze a subplot in there, continue the interest in things. It's like that. You have that long bit thing, I'm never running another book. It's just too hard. Getting to the finish line, like being able to write the end, there's something really uplifting about it. You just feel, yeah, I can do this, and I think it empowers you in other areas in your life too. Being able to do something physically really challenging. And there's physically challenging things I won't do, like jump out of an aeroplane or that sort of thing. So I think if you do something, you push yourself physically a bit, I think that leaks into other areas of your life and you feel much more confident about doing something like writing a book or things. So I think it's really helped me push through the hard, messy bits of writing. And I think it is hard and messy. I don't know about you, Claudine, but I find it hard and messy and and get stuck and it doesn't work and you think, oh... Or I write some article and I think, oh, that's just rubbish. I can't send that off and I have to start again. Distance running, that pushing through hard stuff and going a little bit further, it does translate well into other parts of your life. I think empowering, so it does empower other bits of your life, yeah.
I love that, Jo. I love to hike, and I would say 10 years ago, I didn't think that I would ever be able to do long distance hike. We're talking 27, 30 kilometers a day, things like that. I just never thought that I would be the kind of person who would either do it or enjoy it. But I do both. So, I mean, it's not something I do every week, but I think you're right in the sense that it does empower you to believe in yourself and believe that you can overcome obstacles. You can push through those hard bits, in whatever form that happens to take, whether it's hard emotional periods of your life or, stuck in a plot, you've backed yourself into a corner, you don't know how to get out of that. And just know that you have the skills and the capability to put one foot in front of the other and keep going, that you can actually get through this. And we were talking a little bit earlier, I think before we started recording, about taking care of ourselves and well-being and filling our cup, so to speak, so that we can do all these great things. For me, hiking definitely does that. It gives me, or even just like going on a walk, it does that for me and helps me, refill my creative well. I'm guessing that running does that for you as well.
It does, yeah. And I imagine to do a 30K hike, you need to be walking regularly because you can't just take off and do that without. So I think if you have those little events along the way, it does keep you sort of honest with yourself, I think, and you know, I better go. I don't feel like it's a bit hot today or in Brisbane, a bit wet, a bit whatever, but you still do it because, you've got that little goal at the end. So it's like having a deadline for an article or a book, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very easy, particularly when you do something sedentary. My job is pretty sedentary. I've got the fortunate thing that's quite a large practice and I'm at the far end of the corridor. So for every patient I have to go up and down. We had years ago when they had those step counts. We were doing a fundraising for cancer research or something. And myself and my colleague in the door opposite, we had far more steps everyone because we were just walking up and down this corridor. So I do get up between patients, but it's still a sedentary job. It's not like somebody who's a carpenter or a bricklayer or something. So I think when you have a sedentary job, you do need to somehow or other include something active in your life. And it does help with everything, particularly when you're postmenopausal. But postmenopausal, when we do start to, part of the aging process is that we lose muscle mass, and particularly if people go out of their way to lose weight because they feel overweight and things, you'll lose muscle mass when you do that. And as we lose muscle mass, it's just a gradual sort of a thing, but that ability to live at home independently is compromised. So just being able to open a jar, for example, you think of older ladies not being able to getting out of a chair. You watch an old lady get out of a chair, that's because their quads are shot, but it doesn't have to be like that. There's plenty of, I see some of a woman at 101 I see every week now, and where we're living much longer. So a third of our lives is now post-menopause, and the well-being stuff you do when you're 20 and 30 and 40 will stand you in really good stead. So if you do some sort of aerobic stuff like walking or swimming or cycling or something you enjoy, dancing, and then you have 2 times a week, you have to do something, some sort of strength stuff. So, there's some weights or something like that. That'll stand you in, when you're 80, you really appreciate that because you'll be able to live at home independently. And we think it's the great grand event that makes people that means that you end up in a nursing home. And in fact, it's the little things. You need good shoulder mobility so you can wipe your backside and feed yourself and open the jars and that sort of thing. When you can't do that stuff, that's when you end up in a nursing home eating pap and not having agency over your own life. So I think that well-being stuff has got long-term consequences, not just for your current, being able to write and do things, but being an old lady and being able to live well and live on your own and not being dependent on other people.
To that end, I wondered if you had any tips to offer aspiring authors or women who think that they'd quite like to write a novel or anything really and don't have time.
I'll say none of us have time. Time is just this elastic thing. That's why I didn't start writing till so late. And that's something I really sort of wanted to do. I think you just have to carve out a little space. The first thing I get people to do is either have a space in your house. It might be a desk or a room. If you're not lucky enough to have that, just get a box and fill it with things that you need to write. It might be a notebook, a writing guidebook, or your pens and those sorts of things. And when you decide to write, you just pull that box out and then you can put it away again. But you need to have ready access. You don't need a lot of setting up. You do it on the kitchen table and you've got to cook, you've got to get rid of it all. That's not ideal. So first of all, carve out a little space for yourself physically as well as mentally. And then you just have to decide, is it at night when everyone's watching TV that you maybe have an hour 3 times a week where you do that? Or are you a morning person? Can you get up in the morning? You just need to give up some other little things. Maybe you don't have to be quite as house proud as you were, maybe deal with a house that's got some baskets of washing that aren't folded, or simplify your meals, or get someone in the household to cook meals a couple of times a week. So I think you just need to look at your life and look at the things that you can actually give up without it impacting the quality of your life. And other people in the family and things might find that a bit hard to start with, but I think having a happy person in the house, happy matriarch in the house is worth anything. So you just need to somehow write down what you're doing now and see where you can carve little spaces out.
So I understand that you did a writing residency at Nobby's Lighthouse in Newcastle last year, and you were working on another novel up there. Is there anything you can tell us about that project?
It's a novel called The Last Supper, the title in progress. And it's about 3 women talking about aging, 3 women, and I don't know if I've made them a bit young now, Claudette, approaching 80. And one of them at the beginning of the novel has lost her not very nice husband to 10 years of quite severe dementia. And the 3 of them get together, 3 very different women, and they decide they're not going to become old and frail and dependent on others. So they decide to have a year of doing all the things they love doing. And then at the end of it, they're going to go somewhere beautiful, get the best champagne, have a beautiful meal, and then they're going to make a final exit together. But of course, because it's a novel, it all goes wrong. So, and I'm actually going to do, I thought I could get an editor, but then I've actually decided, I've just signed up with the Australian Writers Centre to do their 6 months. So I've written probably people say I've written a first draft and a second draft, and there's some bits that I've written 20 times. There's some bits I've actually quite happy with the first one. So it's my, I don't know, 2.5, 2 3/4 or something, a rather messy draft. And I just need other people to look at and tell me that's terrible, or that works well, or so that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, I love that. I can't wait to hear more about that. So, Jo, I just wanted to offer you the chance to give us a final word on A World of Silence.
Stay close to your friends, check in with them, and don't be frightened to ask difficult questions. Learn to read between the lines, because often we don't say what we want to say, but our body language does, the way we dress does, the way we don't look at you in the eye does. So just be brave, make sure you check in with your friends and be available for them if they need you.
That's wonderful. Jo, I have so enjoyed this deep, illuminating and very important conversation this morning. Thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
That's it for this episode, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If so, I'd love it if you'd leave a review on your preferred listening platform, which may include Apple Podcasts, Spotify or Amazon Music. Until next time, friends, happy reading.